I think
Sure.
one of the last times you and I talked was about sending in federal forces to secure the
Yes.
courthouse there. And here we are in 2021, and the situation remains the same. Your thoughts, first of all, about why violence continues, and much of it against federal buildings in various places in democratically managed and governed cities.
Well, for one, Lou, as you have pointed out numerous times, because it's tolerated, because it's encouraged. And, you know, we've had 6 months of primarily left-focused violence across the country, overwhelmingly. Yesterday, we had right-of-center focused violence here in the nation's capital, and all of a sudden, a lot of people have suddenly discovered the rule of law. And while I was busy condemning that violence yesterday, it's shocking but not surprising. And we sent from the Department of Homeland Security several hundred officers in to support the Capitol Police when they lost control of the Capitol. Actually, we began sending them before that happened. But nonetheless, we've been consistent. Right or left, violence is not protest. It's crime. And it's not acceptable. And we stand against it 100%. Every time. And we do it. We did it in Portland, and we do it in Washington, D.C. And part of the reason we see it continue to go on, Lou, to your question, is because so many in the media, not you, but so many in the media and in politics have tolerated it up to now. Maybe one of the outgrowths of yesterday is that we all finally agree that violence has no place in political discourse.
One would think that that would not even have to be said in the United States in 2021. It's outrageous. And what we don't know is why we have reached this stage. I'm sure that there are social scientists working on this, but suddenly there is a reflex for officers in law enforcement to reach for guns in the nation's capital. I have to tell you, I was stunned to see yesterday the Capitol Police draw weapons at unarmed protesters, even those inside. I mean, that is, to me, I have to tell you, that's outrageous. And for this young woman to be shot, and I have to believe it was entirely by accident. But that weapon was out of the holster, and it was pointed not only toward her, but those other, what had become members of a mob, and their own fellow agents, law enforcement officers and agents right across, as you see there. I mean, that's not appropriate police tactics in any fashion, is it?
Yeah, I wouldn't expect, you know, that investigation, of course, is ongoing, so I don't want to comment too much, but
I understand.
You never want to get to the use of deadly force, and the way you avoid that, to go back to the Portland example, there are many people who have fought our use of things like tear gas, less than lethal methods. Now, those are what should have been used at the door, and in fact, they were. Tear gas was deployed yesterday, as I understand it, but that was not done effectively or in sufficient numbers to deter a crowd from becoming a mob. And that was a failing of the leadership there. Those consequences have been rolling in. There have been 2 firings at the Capitol Police today. I want to commend the officers there. We were happy and honored to go support them, but it should have not come to that. This should have ended at the doors of the Capitol. They should have never been breached. But the ability to use those other tactics is absolutely critical. And so a lot of the people who are complaining about the outcomes yesterday, including, just as you did appropriately, the killing there inside the Capitol, had other tactics been readily available, had enough officers been there to deploy them, you don't get to that point. It's part of how you avoid the use of deadly force, is using lower levels in sufficient numbers to never get there.
And my criticism of the Capitol Hill police officer and their commanders who had them draw weapons at that point, I do not want anyone to in any way infer from what I've said or think that I am implying a criticism broadly of the Capitol Hill police or law enforcement. But drawing a weapon, and I'm saying this straight up to anyone who wants to make something of it, to draw a weapon when they're absolutely unnecessary, and to have in the line of fire innocent civilians, even though they're part of a mob, for crying out loud, and your own fellow officers, is madness. And it should never have been allowed by the commander of the Capitol Hill Police. And I have to commend the Capitol Police because they have taken immediate action. Think of the last time we heard, Ken, of a police department immediately putting on leave the officer involved in a shooting and firing people who were responsible in the command structure. I mean, I give them great credit. Do you as well?
I do, but to be clear, this is the Speaker of the House, and I have condemned her in the past for some of her comments against police officers in the last 6 months, but she's the one who fired these two, and I agree with her here. This is an appropriate step to take.
Absolutely.
It's what you do with the leadership that fails like this, because you put too much pressure on those officers when you fail at the front line, and then they make decisions. They make more bad decisions in bad circumstances, and the leadership is largely responsible for putting them in those circumstances.
Right. Yeah, and I make it very clear. I am commending the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. This just doesn't happen, and it is hopefully a beginning of great change in this country in the way in which our law enforcement agencies respond and expect to be held accountable for their decisions, particularly in command as well.
They have great responsibility and great authority at the same time, so we rely on them a great deal.
And we are grateful to every single one of them.
Yes.
I want to turn to find out where the intelligence is, what the intelligence is saying to you and other authorities and high officials about who was involved, how that mob was created from what was to that point a peaceful and orderly protest. I mean, there are even moments you can see in this the Statuary Hall where they're walking between the rope lines. They're not even moving out of the rope lines.
Right.
And then suddenly that has become a violent mob.
Well, as so often happens, Lou, what you have was overwhelmingly peaceful for most of the day. In fact, many of them had been, for instance, in the Ronald Reagan building. You haven't heard anything about that because there were no problems there. But the Capitol was the epicenter yesterday, and we all knew that. We protected, as we do at DHS, all the other federal buildings, but we understood where the crowd was going. It was not like 25,000 people turned violent. It was, as it often is, a very small minority within that crowd that decided that the opportunity presented itself and that they were going to become violent opportunists and commit crimes and be violent, and it had all sorts of terrible consequences. We've got just 30 seconds. Am I correct to assume that there is a vigorous investigation of all of the actors in that mob in the building? Ken Cuccinelli, thanks as always. Good to talk with you, and we appreciate each